Good evening and welcome to episode 268 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's a Thursday edition of the Private Property Podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to it. You've missed out on quite a lot of great episodes that can help you on your property journey. So do make sure that you go to our Facebook or our YouTube page to catch up on all those great episodes. And to all our regular viewers, welcome back. You know how we do it. Every single weekday at 7 p.m., you and I have an appointment where I'm always in conversation with a property expert who helps us navigate our property journey. Doesn't matter whether you're a tenant, whether you're a landlord, you're looking to buy, sell, or build. This is the property show that you want to make sure you are always plugged into. It's also the only daily property show in South Africa, so you know that we are your authority on all things relating to property. And talking about all things relating to property, of course, you can catch our other great shows across the Private Property social media pages. I am talking about the Farming Podcast that award-winning farmer Umbali Noko brings to your screens every single Tuesdays and Thursdays. So do make sure that you catch her on later on this evening at 8 p.m. for that edition of the Farming Podcast. And every Friday and Monday, Chad brings you the Home Shoppers Show. And that is for all of us who certainly want to get a taste of what is possible when it comes to some of the great properties that you can find on privateproperty.co.za. So do make sure that you catch him. You can also catch him and SJ Clarkson on TikTok as they do really great videos showcasing not just the properties that we have on the website, but also some really great tools that you can use on your property journey. And talking of SJ Clarkson, she brings you the First Time Home Buyers Show every single Wednesdays. And of course, she's always in conversation with somebody who's walked that first time home buying journey and has gone on to grow their property portfolio from strength to strength. Well, those are some of the great shows that you can catch every single weekday at 8 p.m. right here across the Private Property social media pages. So do make sure that you're following us across our social media pages. And you can also follow myself at Zamantungwa_K on Twitter as well as on Instagram. Now, this evening's conversation is one that I find very exciting because I know that not a lot of us still have the greatest understanding of property auctions, sort of the do's and the don'ts, what we need to be looking out for when it comes to all things property auctions. And we're going to be looking at, if you're considering buying a property on auction this evening, we're going to be looking at why an auction broker is your best bet. You're probably been wondering why use a broker, what do they actually do, and some of the benefits perhaps of going the auction route. And to help us better understand auctioning and what are some of the things we should certainly be looking out for, I'm joined this evening by somebody we've had on the show before. That is, of course, Ari Ben, who is the CEO at AuctionInc. Ari, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us again on the show.
Good evening, Zamantungwa. Thanks for having me, and good evening to all your private property listeners. It's great to be back on the show this evening. Thanks for having me.
It's always so great having a conversation with you, Ari, especially when we look at auctions, because one of the things that I'm realizing is so increasingly, so many people, of course, have an interest in property, and whether it is, wanting to, make the big leap and actually acquire property. Some people still sort of in their researching phase, just want to get their ducks in a row before they make that big decisions. And of course, with others, you've already acquired a property, you're now looking at adding to your property portfolio, and you're looking at different ways that you can make that acquisition. And one of the ways, of course, is looking at buying at a property auction. And this is one of those things where people still, for example, think that an auction is a repossessed house, for example, and don't quite understand that there are different kinds of auctions that there are out there. I think first, before we even look at, how a broker can play a crucial role during this journey, what to look out for, just for those at home who still don't quite understand the different kinds of auctions that they find. So they also understand as we go on with our conversation this evening, perhaps take us through the different kinds of auctions that we have out there, just to help those who are probably still look at auctions as this is a repossessed property, it's going to be doom and gloom, people won't want to exit that particular property. Just take us through the different kinds of auctions rather, that we find.
Perfect. So in essence, there are two major types of auctions. The first type of auction is known to be a sheriff auction. as you've mentioned, those are the type of properties that are potentially have been repossessed. And typically those are the types of properties that a lot of first-time buyers and consumers out there are familiar with. The other type of auction is more your private seller. The private seller is different in the sense that they willingly are going to auction. The terms and conditions of the two types of auctions are somewhat different, and either type of auction has its specific appeal. When it comes to private auctions, there are a number of types of auctions in that sense. One is an online auction. In the last year and a half, you'll have noticed a lot of new online auction, a lot of companies vying for the online auction route. Again, a lot of benefits in that. There's an on-site auction, and that's when the auction takes place at the property. And then there's a multi-property auction, whereby a number of auctions are taking place during a specific time lot.
And I think that's such a great starting point, Ari, because I know that the majority of our conversation is going to focus on the private auction side, because I think, a sheriff's auction will almost need to have a very different, topic around that, because there are other things people should probably watch out for. And I often say to people, you probably may not want to buy your first property, especially if it's your primary residence, via that route, if you've never researched auctions at all. So we'll definitely cover sheriff auctions in another time, because I know that oftentimes a lot of property investors have a huge appetite for those kinds of auctions and acquiring properties at a discount at those kinds of auctions. So then when we look at the private auction, Ari, and people are looking at potentially buying from a private, those kinds of auctions. I know that AuctionInc, has quite a lot of those. I'm subscribed. I get all the great properties. I think it's a weekly newsletter, and you're able to just see all the properties that are available, whether it's residential or commercial, and sometimes even industrial. What role does the auction broker play when it then comes to buying during a property auction?
Perfect. So I think before answering that question, it's useful to define what an auction broker is. In essence, an auction broker is very similar to an estate agent. However, they would specialize in the sale of both residential and commercial property via auction. So an auction broker, both an estate agent and an auction broker, needs to be registered with the Estate Agency Affairs Board and hold a valid fidelity fund certificate. Those are two very important criteria that needs to be in place. And when that's in check, then obviously you're dealing with a reputable broker. The role of the broker is first and foremost to source high demand properties. And that's very key, because it's very important that we're only taking properties to auction that are A, in high demand, and are B, very, very well priced. The auction broker then in essence will assist a would-be purchaser, be it a first-time purchaser or seasoned purchaser, to purchase the property at every step of the way. So that would include answering any questions that you may have about the property, the terms of the auction. I know for some people, auction can be quite a daunting process. So really the role of the auction broker is to assist a would-be purchaser with the purchase at every step of the way, and not only prior to the auction, during the auction, and post-auction. So essentially, it's absolutely critical to have a very solid professional broker in your corner at all times.
I see some of our top fan gang members on Facebook are signing in this evening. Ubongani, Queen B, Mabunda, Mata Shingange. I want to hear from you. I want to see who is plugged in. Do drop us a green heart down here below so that we can make sure that you are watching us, of course, whether it's on Facebook or on YouTube. And I also want to find out from you at home when it comes to auctions. What are some of your reservations when it comes to buying a property on auction? And if you have bought a property on auction, how was that experience like? And Ari, this probably brings me to my next question, because a lot of people typically know buying a property, let's call it the conventional way, where you go on our website and you see that these are the properties that are for sale. You'll contact the estate agent and you'll view the property. And then you obviously, if you like it, you'll sign your offer to purchase. And the next things, you essentially understand that step. Perhaps for viewers at home who still don't quite understand, who don't have a sense of how the auction process would then work when it comes to a private auction, perhaps take us through how that side would ultimately work.
Perfect. So in essence, it's critical that you understand the process of buying on auction before you proceed to buy a property in auction. One of the key differences between buying on auction versus privately is that you can't submit an offer that's subject to finance, subject to all sorts of things. When you're buying a property in auction, it's critical that A, you're very comfortable, and B, you are qualified to purchase a property on auction. Let me unpack that. So just taking you through the steps, first and foremost, you would make contact with a broker once you've identified a property of your choice. Very important to ascertain, are you buying the property to move into as a home? Is this going to be an investment? Various, the investigation that you're going to undertake will be different depending on the scenario. Two is in either scenario, you want to set up a viewing at the property and you're given an opportunity to inspect the property. You can walk the inside, the outside. If you're buying the property to live in, obviously it needs to feel good for you. And then once you're comfortable with the property, you need to start doing your homework in terms of what's it worth? What's it worth to you? What's the actual market value of the property? One of the key differences in auction versus private sale is that there's no price really. You set the price. So that's actually the beauty of auction, is that you set the price and you can bid up to value that you're comfortable with. But it is critical that you do your homework. You need to ensure that you can afford the property. It's a very final process in the sense that once you've placed your bid, it's not subject to finance. So you need to ensure that you've spoken with your bank before the auction. You're very confident that you're going to get finance. You still have the option to finance the property post buying the property in auction. But it is very important that you do your homework in terms of affordability prior to the auction. Once you're comfortable with the property and you can afford the property, it's critical that you set a budget, because on the day of the auction you can get caught up in the excitement, and that's again one of the beauties of the auction. And sometimes you may go a little bit too high, sometimes you could have gone a bit higher and you lose out on the property. So it's important that before you arrive, you set your budget, you know what your limit is, and you go there ready to go up to your budget. Finally, you'll want to ensure that you have the necessary funds available to place the deposit. Many of the auction houses in South Africa charge between 10 and 15% deposit, and that is required on the fall of the hammer. So it's not a situation where you can place an offer on the property and then think about it afterwards. You need to rock up to that auction confident and willing to purchase it on the day of the auction. So it's very important that you understand that. And finally, you want to do your homework. And again, that's one of the biggest reasons why you want to actually partner with a reputable broker, because that broker would have done a fair level of due diligence on the property. When you buy a property in auction, one of the differences between sheriff auction and normal auction is that the rates have to be paid up until the date of transfer by the seller. So you're buying that property, you get the property with a clean bill of health, but you still need to ensure that you've done your checks. If you're buying a property in a body corporate, are the body corporate funds stable? All sorts of questions that you've got to ask yourself prior to buying on auction, as opposed to after buying traditionally. And finally, arriving at the auction prepared. You arrive with your FICA documents. If the property's taking place, the auction's taking place online, you make sure that you've registered well in advance. You don't want to go into an auction in a flustered state. You want to arrive having done your homework and ready to bid.
Ari, one of the things that you mentioned earlier is around how by the time you arrive at an auction, you need to already be qualified. You need to know that you've got the funds, because signing that offer isn't subject to finance. what happens to people who, you go on auction and perhaps you do get sort of taken in with some of the excitement and you end up being the highest bidder, only to find, and you actually have the funds in your account at that day to pay for the deposit. So those funds you have, because obviously that's immediate, but then you don't actually get bond financing or are able to raise the financing. What then happens in that instance?
So I think in that instance, and it's not a very common occurrence that we find. Specifically in our business, we've really spent a lot of time with our purchaser before the auction. So there's often no surprises, and we'll assist as far as possible in guiding a person so that they don't get into that situation. If that situation arises, often what's useful is to communicate with the bond originator who's actually very motivated to make the deal go through. They will actually fight on behalf of the seller, of the purchaser, to source finance. If, as a last resort, you still don't manage to get finance, and often the sellers will provide an extension, they'll work with the buyers to ensure that they can do everything in their power to get the finance. But if, as a last resort, you do not get your finance, unfortunately, the deposit that you pay up front will be forfeited. And that's a very, very important point. And why I emphasize rocking up to the auction, having already gone to the banks and getting a fair level of confidence that you'll get auction. And you can get pre-auction finance. There are a couple avenues, and perhaps in another interview we can go into some detail there. But there are options of arriving to the auction with finance already pre-approved, so you can bid with confidence.
We are taking your questions and comments at home this evening as we look at what you need to, certainly how you should, consider using a auction broker when you are going to a property broker when you're going on an auction, and really unpacking, of course, the private auction aspect of things as opposed to a sheriff's auction. So if you have any questions and comments when it comes to this, and I want to hear from you, and I also want to hear from you at home if you've ever bought a property on auction. How was that experience for you? And if you've got any reservations about buying a property on auction. One of our top fan members has said, Umatha Shingang has asked, how long after confirming the sale at the auction do you have to secure your home loan?
So I think it would differ with various auction companies. It would range anywhere from 21 to 45 days. And that essentially is the time period in which you have to raise guarantees. But it is business days, and it is often very sufficient and not too much of a rush if you consider how many, taking 21 working days, that probably translates to about 27, 28 full days. And generally speaking, it's between 21 and 45 days to furnish guarantees.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ari, I think one of the things that I want us to unpack for viewers at home is what are some of the things that they need to consider or watch out for in the event where they want to buy a property on auction? Because I think one of the things is you tend to not know what you don't know, and you've already done such a great job of highlighting how you need to be prepared, you need to be ready, you said you need to have your finances in order, because you wouldn't want to, ultimately pay a deposit and only not to secure financing at the end of whether it's the 21 days or whatever number of days, and lose out on your money. But what are some of the things that somebody who's considering buying their first property on auction should be aware of and consider throughout their journey?
Well, again, it comes down to firstly being comfortable with the property, and that's why I mentioned the fact that with auction you have that ability to walk the property and really do your due diligence. That's the key here. So if you're buying a home, you want to do a thorough walk. You may want to employ a professional that comes with you. Seek advice. If you don't know the answers, bring people in with you. But most importantly, your auction broker will be there to hold your hand throughout the process. Again, very, very critical is to understand the true value of the property. So if you're buying a property and you believe it's worth 2 million rand, and you're willing to go up to 2 million rand, but with doing a little bit more research, you find that the property is actually worth 1.8 million rand, then it's an important factor. You don't want to overpay for property. But on the same note, you may be willing to go up to 1.8 million rand, but the property is worth 2.3, 2.4. You don't want to miss out because you didn't do your correct due diligence and homework there. So I think the key, to break it down in terms of the terms of the auction, it's important to understand that the purchaser is responsible for paying the commission and not the seller. That's a key difference. So it's important that you build that into your calculations. You are often required to furnish a deposit of between 10 and 15%. And not in every instance will that offer be accepted. It's important to realize that the seller has 3 days to confirm that sale or not, unless the auction is an auction without reserve, in which instance the auction will be deemed to be accepted regardless of what level the bidding goes to. So it's a key difference. You may get a situation where the seller's mandate price is X and the bidding goes up to half of that. It's unlikely that the deal will go through. But one of the key benefits is that often only properties that are very well priced will go to auction. So you're guaranteed to snap up a bargain in most instances.
And taking more of your questions and comments at home, we've got a question from Jason Diong asking, is the purchaser responsible to settle the outstanding utility bills at the sheriff's auction?
Yes, so at a sheriff auction, it would be the responsibility of the purchaser to pay for all outstanding rates and taxes, any electricity that's owing, and very important to find out what that figure is. Unfortunately, with sheriff auctions, there's often no intermediaries. There wouldn't be a broker per se. You'd rock up at a sheriff auction, you're dealing directly with the auctioneer. Whereas private auction companies would have a broker who would be able to unpack a lot of these questions. But to answer your question, it would be the purchaser's responsibility to pay for any outstanding expenses that are liable in the property or sheriff auction. Private auction, not the case.
Ari, I think one of the things that viewers at home might probably now be wondering is, when you look at the private auction, I think for a moment, let's leave the sheriff's auction a little bit. So when you look at even a private auction, you've already highlighted, for example, how the purchaser is the one who's going to be paying the commission. They obviously also need to be paying, the transfer fees in the event, transfer fees. They may have to perhaps even pay bond registration attorneys in the event where they, take a home loan out. And for a purchaser, this might seem like, okay, this seems like quite a lot that I'm, taking on relative to if I went we'll call it the conventional way of buying. What are some of the benefits then of buying a property on auction as opposed to just buying it the conventional way with the normal estate agent and you put in your offer to purchase?
Fantastic, very good question. So one of the key benefits of buying a property in auction is the fact that you have you have access to such a wide variety of properties. And this would range, from residential to commercial to industrial. Within residential, often properties that are very unique and exciting hit the auction floor. So you essentially have a menu of properties to choose from. Secondly, the type of sellers that prefer to go the auction route are often sellers that have an element of urgency. Sellers that are often immigrating, leaving the country. They are either upscaling or downscaling. Often sellers that have attempted to sell their property the traditional method, they've been sitting with their properties on the market for 5, 6, 7, 8 months. They are now very motivated. There's a level of urgency which has a very which translates into an opportunity for a purchaser, because now they're dealing with a very motivated seller. And that translates to a very attractive market price. That's a very critical, important benefit. Thirdly, you are buying the property with a clean bill of health, meaning all rates and taxes, the electrical compliance certificates, all outstanding bills are paid up to the date of transfer, and you're going to be buying a property that has been thoroughly investigated by the auction house, and you're buying the property with a clean bill of health. Fourth is the process is extremely smooth. Often when you're dealing with certain types of purchase, it's up and it's down. There's a negotiation process, only to find out that somebody else has just bought the property. It can be somewhat frustrating. With auction, it's a smooth process. The entire process lasts a number of days in terms of finding the property, making contact with the broker, auction day, and the deal's done. And you know exactly where you stand. I would say another benefit being the fact that the whole negotiation process is very transparent. You're standing in a room, you can see who the other buyers are, you understand, what's the highest bid, what's the true market level. Whereas other types of negotiating, you don't know who you're negotiating against, you don't know who the other buyers are, you don't know if there are other buyers. It's a game of poker that you don't even know who you're playing against. So, with auction, you can look at the other buyers in the eyes and you can see exactly who you're dealing with. It's very important. And I would say one of the other main benefits of buying via auction is the finality of the process. You know where you stand. It's not a backwards and forwards only to find out that at the last minute, the deal didn't go through for whatever reason. You know that when you bid on that property and the seller accepts it, the deal is done. There's that finality and you can celebrate. So there are a number of very exciting benefits, and that's a reason why auction has been around for as long as it has. Thousands of years. It's the most trusted mainstream method of sale around the world, and there's a reason for that.
Ari, one of the things that you mentioned that I know can be so frustrating when we look at, let's say, the conventional, traditional way of buying is a motivated seller, because one of the things that we've picked up, particularly right now, if you've looked at any properties during since lockdown started to date, one of the things that you're picking up is depending when you are looking, certain property prices are going higher in terms of what is being advertised, even though the properties haven't necessarily been upgraded, for example. And sometimes, I sometimes tend to look at more commercial buildings, so it's still a residential, but it's a block of flats, and have been monitoring those particular buildings for a while because they've actually been on the market for an extended period of time. When lockdown started, prices went up. There's a particular building that has gone up in the past year by nearly 30% in terms of what the advertised amount is. And that also just can be very frustrating, right? Because you're thinking, why would a seller even do that, where you're asking something that's far beyond what the market is willing to pay, or other comparable properties in your area? Even your neighbor has just sold their property and they priced it at 30% less than what you're currently asking. And I think it's one of those very frustrating things, because sometimes you even end up speaking to the estate agents and they'll tell you that, look, they've sent different offers to the seller, but for some other reason, they're still not budging. So working with a motivated seller, certainly from an auction perspective, you at least know that you're not going to have that hassle. Because I know that when you want a particular property and it makes sense for your property portfolio and whatever else you want to perhaps do with it, one of the things you do not want to have to deal with is a seller who is a bit indecisive or suddenly decides, maybe let me not sell this particular property. It can be quite a frustrating process to undergo. So, Ari, you started mentioning this earlier on in our conversation. I think for viewers at home who are now sort of waking up to the potential of buying their property on auction as opposed to the more traditional way of buying it, I think let's explore then why work with a property broker in particular, especially if you're still just on the market, maybe you're looking for a 2-bed in a particular area. What role does then a property broker play, or certainly how do they help you on your journey as a prospective buyer?
It's quite understandable that, for a first-time buyer, you may not understand all the terms and conditions associated with auction. Maybe, just buying property alone for the first time can be a somewhat daunting experience. So it's critical that, you're dealing with a reputable auction broker that you can trust and that you get along with. It's important that you have that rapport with the auction broker, because it can be a very technical product. And so I would say that the key is that the broker is there to assist you in answering questions, first and foremost. Next step would then be to understand, roundabout what kind of price level is the property on the market for. There's no fixed price, and that's the benefit of auction, is that it benchmarks the value of the property. But, the auctioneer will kind of guide you, tell you, you're within range, or, maybe this property is for you or not for you. And if it's not for you, he'll take you to another property. So the role of the broker is then to, really guide you along the way, hold your hand throughout the process, through the first phone call all the way to the auction day, assist you in registering for the auction, ensure that you understand the terms of the auction, and then finally, once the transaction has been complete, ensure that the transfer process goes through very smoothly.
Well, Ari, before I let you go this evening, any final tips for viewers at home who are looking at buying a property on auction this year?
Yes, I think just try and view as many different opportunities as possible. There's a countless number of auction houses in the country, very good ones. Johannesburg, Cape Town, Pretoria, Durban. See what's out there. Look at what each auction house has to offer. See what properties catch your interest. Don't just jump for the first one. Do your homework. See what's available, and then connect with a broker that you're comfortable with and that you can trust, and will take you through your property journey from the first property all the way to the time where you're a kingpin and you own the whole street.
Well, that's actually quite a great place to leave it at. I know many of the viewers at home certainly want to own the block, so you're going to buy it one property at a time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Ari.
Thank you for having me.
And all the best. And thank you very much. And that is Ari Ben, who's the CEO at AuctionInc. And I hope to all of you, I hope we've got ambitions of owning the block, that of course you do continue watching, the Private Property Podcast with myself, continue following us on social media and getting all the great tips and insights that can help you buy a block, or certainly a couple of blocks along the way. Well, that's it from me, Zamantungwa Khumalo, and the rest of the Private Property Podcast team. We're back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. It is a Thursday. Look at me thinking it's Wednesday. It's a Thursday, so you can catch award-winning farmer Umbali Nwogo at 8 p.m. for the Farming Podcast. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.